So, our minig is that we complete the entire Chamisha Chumshei Torah every year. And in spite of the fact that there were other minhagim, as the Gemara brings in Megillah, and the Rambam in Hilchis Kriyas HaTorah mentions that even in his time, there were places that they finished the Torah once in 3 years, but nevertheless, the Rambam says that the minig haposhut, the common custom is b'chol Yisrael, by all Yidden, to complete the Torah once a year. And based on this minig, the Sedris were divided into 53 or 54, so that we should have a Sedra for every Shabbos. The Sedras have names, as you probably noticed. This week it's Chayei Sara. the we could think that it's just for identification purposes. I mean, that's the pashtas. But perhaps there is some meaning to the names of the parshas. I have a raya because, Parshas Noach is not called Toldois, even though it says Ve'ela Toldois Noach. On the other hand, Parshas Toldois, which is Eila Toldois Yitzchak, is not called Parshas Yitzchak, it's called Parshas Toldois. So there probably is some meaning behind the names of the Cedrus. So the question is, this week we learn Chayei Sara. It's quite an interesting name for what we read this week, because the entire parsha is really taking place after Sara already died. The Torah is summing up Vayiyu Chayei Sara. The life of Sara was with past tense. She died in Kiryas Arba, and then the content of the parsha has nothing to do with Sarah's life. It's all after Sarah's death. So why do we refer to this parsha as Chayei Sara? Maybe it should be called Vayiyu Chayei Sara, or it should be called Vayiyu. It's also not so terrible, because we have parshas Vayetze, Vayeshev, Vayishlach. Vayiyu could also be a name. So what's the Chayei Sara? What's the Chayei Sara? In the beginning of this week's parsha, we talk at length about the burial of Sara. And the centerpiece of the parsha is about the shlichus of Eliezer to find a wife for Rivka, until we reach the point where he marries her. And then it says, Vayivieha Yitzchok ha'oihela Sara imoy. Vayikach es Rivka vatehi loy leisha vayehoveha vayinochem Yitzchok achar imoy. Rashi says, ha'oihela Sara imoy. Vayivieha ha'oihela. Va'arehi Sara imoy. She, meaning Rivka, is now Sara imoy. Kloimar, v'nases dugmas Sara imoy. That Rivka became dugmas Sara imoy. She calls Manshe Sara kayemes hoyoner doluk me'erev Shabbos le'erev Shabbos. Ubracha mitzuya be'isa. V'onon koshur al ha'oyel. U'mishamesa pasku. Yeah, there no longer was a ner doluk. There was no longer a bracha mitzuya be'isa and an honor kosher al ha'oyel. Shebos Rivka chozru. So Rivka is like the replacement of Sara imoy. Then it says achrei imoy vayinochem achrei imoy. So it says in Rashi derech eretz kolzman. That's the way of the world. Kolzman she imoy shalodam kayemes koruchu etzla. He's attached to her. It's interesting. I mean, Yitzchak is already 37 years old. Umishamesa humisnachem beishtoi. Yeah, so it's not just that Sarah already died, but his marriage to Rivka somehow, on a certain level, makes him forget about his mother. He's no longer Koruch Achareo. He has Rivka. And this topic, the topic of Yitzchak's marriage, is the centerpiece of the parsha, which we refer to as Chayei Sara. And then we come to the third topic in the parsha, which is Vayosef Avraham Vayikach Isha Ushma Ktura. Vatelad lo Zimron Ves Yokshon Ves Medon Ves Midyon Ves Yishbok Ves Shuach. So life goes on without Sarah. It's not only that life goes on. Who was Keturah that Avram now married after the death of Sara? The Rashbam says, Lefi Apshat, Ein Zu Hogar. Okay, the Ramban also says in the Dibra Maskul HaPilakshim that Keturah was not Hogar. He has Rayas. But Rashi says, based on Midrashe Chazal, Keturah Zu Hogar. V'nikreis Keturah al Shem Shenoim Ma'aseho Kiktoires. V'shekoshra Pischa. Keturah in Lashon Arami is a tie, a knot. So she was koshra pischa sheloy nizdav golo odom miyom shepirsha me Avram. She wasn't with anybody else since she left Avram. And it's interesting because Rashi always says that vani loy basi elo lepshutoy shel mikra. Rashi is mafarish the psukim according to the pshutoy, and here Rashi brings this midrash, which lechayra we don't see any remez in the pasuk that Keturah is Hagar, but that's what Rashi says, that Keturah is Hagar. Now, yeah, how does Rashi see that? The Kli Yakar actually says Vayosef Avraham, Vayikach Isho Shmo Keturah Vayosef. Why does it say Vayosef? It should have just said Vayikach Avraham Isho. So Vayosef means he did it once again. In other words, he already had her before, and now he took her again. So from the Vayosef, we know that Keturah is Hagar. But now the question is, if we're talking about Hagar, as Chazal say, so it's kind of unsettling because this woman, Sara, kicked out of her house. I mean, in last week's Sedger, we read, Vatoymer Lavrom Goresh Es Ha'amazois Vezbeno. She demanded that he be driven out, that they be driven out of the house. And it says already over there, Vayera Hadavar Ma'oid Be'ene Avrom. He was very displeased, but nevertheless, he did it. So what's happening now? The truth is that it's not just the request of Sara over there in Parshas Vayera. It says, Vayomer Elokim el Avrom, Al Yeira Beinecho al Hanar va'al Amosecho. Koila shetoymer elecho Sara shma bekoila. So Rashi says that Avram was a tuffle l'Sara benavius. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu backed up Sarah's request. So how is it that Avram is now that Sara died? He's taking back Hagar. It must be that there's no stira, there's no contradiction between the girush of Sara then and there, which HaKadosh Baruch Hu backed up, and Avram Avinu's taking her back. And the pshat l'chayra is because the Sara demanded that he kick out Hagar and Yishmael because Vateire Sara is ben Hagar hamitzris asher yoldo la'Avram mitzachek. Rashi says, Avodah Zarah or Gilui Arayis or Shvichis Domim, she was afraid that'll have a negative influence on Yitzchok. And she wants to make sure, Kilo Yirash, in B'niyim Yitzchok, that he shouldn't inherit Avram, that Yitzchok should be the hemshech of Avram. But these two concerns are no longer because Yitzchok already got married and he's on his own. And it's also clear that Yitzchok yikor l'chazera, as it says, Vayitein Avram es kol asher lo Yitzchok ulevnei apilagshim asher la'Avram nos na'Avram matonis vayishalchem me'al Yitzchok b'noi boidenu chai keid mo el arzo b'nei kedem. So they're going to be separate, and they won't be included in the Yerusha. But nevertheless, this happens right after Sarah dies. I mean, why? It sounds like he's seizing the opportunity that the Sara is no longer to take back Hagar. And this also is in Parshas Chayei Sara. What is this about? So, in the beginning of the Parsha, it says, Avram says to the Bnei Chayei, Ger v'soishav anoichi imochem, tnu li achuzas kever imochem, ve'ekbera mesi milefonai. What is ve'ekbera es mesi milefonai? So that I shall bury my dead from before me? What's milefonai? And he says it again a few psukim later. He says, "Vayidaber itom lemor im yeshes nafshichem ligbur es meisi milafonai shmauni ufiguli beEphraim ben Tzoichar." What's milafonai? The Ramban already wants to know what the milafonai is, and the Ramban says, "V'tam milafonai ki im loisasu kain ekberenu beoroin," meaning he's threatening them that you have two choices: either you give me a plot of land, or I'm going to keep her buried in an orain. In other words, she will remain lefonai. She will remain above ground, and Mamela. That's how he's trying to convince them to give him the to allow him to bury her in the Moras HaMachpelah. Yeah, the Klichemdo has a ganz arich is that Pashtus you're not Mekayim the mitzvahs kfura in a oran, you have to be kover in the Adoma. So how did he make this threat? But Al Kaponim, that's what the Ramban says. And then the Ramban adds another pshat, Oy Yiyeh Taimoy, or maybe the pshat is Mesi Asher Hu Lefonai, V'tzorech Ani L'Maheh L'Kovroi. In other words, he's saying the mace is already Lefonai. We're not talking about buying a mokum kvura for somebody that's still alive, and we're talking about something in the future. No, we're talking about a mesi shehu lefonai. B'tzorech ani lemaher lekoivroi. We have to rush it up because she needs to be buried now. Those are the two pshatim of the Ramban. But the Ksaf Sofer says something interesting. He says ve'ekbaro mesi milafonai ulekamon gamkein likbores mesi milafonai v'ayim Ramban shehirgish b'zeh. He says v'nirali. Kihine had tzaddikim b'misason kruyim chayim. Tzaddikim, even after their death, are considered alive. Umisason rak beguf, she'odam roya be'einov. Their death is only in the guf, which is what's apparent, what's seen, what's visible. Aval haneshama chayo v'kayemes. V'hainu meisi milafonai. Dafke mashe lefonai meis. He's emphasizing that it's dafke mashe milafonai meis. Only the part of her that's milafonai, that's apparent, that's visible. That's what died. Ube'emes hi chayo. Yeah, be'emes. This is the pasuk says in Koheles, ki mikre b'nei ha'adam u'mikre ha'behema. The fate of man and the fate of the beast. They have the same fate. He dies like they die. There's one spirit to all. Everything goes to the same place. But then comes the next pasuk and he says, who knows? The spirit of man that ascends above. And the spirit of the behema which goes down into the ground. Yeah. So there's a difference. There is a difference, or there is no difference. I mean, are man and beast alike, or are they different? Is it ruach echad lakoil, or no? So obviously what he's saying is that it depends. It depends how a person identifies himself. What is the person? A person that sees himself as a physiological creature, as a bundle of chemicals. I mean, he's identifying with his behema level. He lives a behema life, and on that level, it's ruach echad lakoil. It's one spirit to all. It's kemoizeh kein moizeh. On this level, it's hakoil bo mina offer, v'hakoil shov ela offer. But mi yoidea, just one second. But mi yoidea, who the one that knows, ruach b'nei ha'adam ha'olehi l'maylo, those individuals that rise to the higher level of human existence, and they're aware of their nefesh ha'elokis, they live a neshamadika life. They're not defined by their biology. Yeah, they live a life of ruach b'nei ha'adam ha'olehi l'maylo, and the life of the neshama has no hefsek, and therefore tzaddikim b'misason kruyim chayim. You know, in the Sefer HaTanya, in the Geras HaKodesh, Simon Chav Zayin, there's a letter that he wrote to the Yoshvei Eretz HaKodesh after the passing of Reb Mendel of Vitebsk. And B'toich HaDvarim he writes, V'yesh loim al derech shekibalti al maimer chazal, the shovak chayim l'chol chay. That's a tzaddik that passes. He leaves life for all living. What does it mean he leaves life for all living? He says, Kenoida, shechayei hatzadik einom chayim bisriyim. The life of the tzaddik are not, is not a life of flesh and blood. Ki im chayim ruchoniyim. It's a spiritual life. Sheheim emuna v'yira v'ahava v'chula, etc. Ushloisha midos elu heim b'chol oilam v'oilam adrum hamaylis, etc. V'hine, beheyois ha-tzadik chai al pnei ha'adama. When the tzaddik is alive on this planet Earth, hoyu sholosh midos elu b'toich kli ulevushalahem. They were embodied by him. B'pchines mokem gashmi. They had a certain place. Shehi b'chines nefesh hakshura begufoy. V'chol talmidov einam mekablim rak ha'oras midas elu. They only get a ha'ora that comes from these midas. V'zivon, what they radiate, ha'meir chutz l'kli zeh al yedei diburoi u'machshavoy savagdoshim, etc. Aval ha'achar p'tirosoi yochol kol ha'korev elav l'kabel chelik mebchines ruchoy shebegan Eden hoil ve'ena b'toich kli v'loy b'toich mokem gashmi. And he says that's what the Zohar says, that a tzaddik de ispater ishtakach bekulu almin yatim b'chayoy, that he's more present than when he was here. So, meaning that the tzaddikim b'misoson kriyim chayim is not just that they themselves continue to live, but the life energy, their life energy, is more present in this world after they pass. In any case, according to the Ksav Sofer, this is what Avram Avinu is emphasizing. The ekbera Mesi milafonai. He's not burying Sara herself. He's only burying the Mesi milafonai, the part of her that's seen by the physical eye. And therefore, in spite of the fact that our parsha is talking about what happens to Sara, what happens to Sara and what happens in general after Sara, after her death, it's still called Parshas Chayei Sara. The message is that the Mesi is just milafonai, but Chayei Sara go on. Now, Avram Avinu doesn't focus on the past, which is gone and is no longer, but he does what needs to be done in order to ensure that the legacy of Sarah should be a living legacy, that she should continue to be present, and therefore he now makes the hishtadlus to marry off Yitzchak, and he sends Eliezer to find the woman that will be capable of continuing this moireshes. And so it was. As Rashi says, Vaharei Sara imoy. She is now the embodiment of Sara, of what Sara stands for. The ner is doluk me'erev Shabbos l'erev Shabbos, the broch is mitzuya be'isa, the onan is kosher ala oil. So the Vayinochem Yitzchak achar imoy is not because he forgets about her, but because she now is because he now is continuing through her the ongoing existence of Sarah in this world. So Vayosef Avram Vayikach Isho Shmo Ktura, according to Rashi, is Hagar. Now, as we said, it's poshut that this move is not against Sarah's will, because not only Sarah is that she be kicked out, HaKadosh Baruch Hu agreed, right? She's greater Baruch HaKodesh. But together with HaKadosh Baruch Hu's agreement to what Sara said, Gorei sha'oma hazois ve'es beno, ki lo yirash ben ha'oma hazois and b'niyim Yitzchak, HaKadosh Baruch Hu added, right then and there, v'gam es ben ha'oma legoy asimenu, ki zarachahu. Yishmael is not a mistake. V'gam es ben ha'oma legoy asimenu, ki zarachahu. There's room for Yishmael, and he's going to grow and prosper, but not in the home of Avram. You do need to protect Yitzchak from the influence of Yishmael, the Metzachik. So Sara Imenu had a task to ensure that Yitzchak shouldn't absorb any negative influence. This son, from which the Klal Yisrael is supposed to come, but Avram Avinu, besides for the fact that Avram hoiled as Yitzchak, and Dafke be Yitzchak Yikar l'Chazera, he has another task, As it says in Parshas Lech Lecha, "V'yedaber ito Elokim leimor, ani hine brisi itoch v'hoyisa la'av hamoin goyim." So Avram Avinu has the role of being an Av Hamoin Goyim. And it's not like a minor or marginal task. Avram Avinu is defined by this. V'lo yikorei oid shimcha Avram, v'hoya shimcha Avraham, ki Av Hamoin Goyim nesaticha v'hifreisi oischa b'ma'oid ma'oid, unesaticha legoyim, u'melachim imcho yitzeu. So his name is changed from Avram to Avraham because of the universal mission that he has to spread the Emunah in the Borei Olam in the entire world by having Goyim and Hamoin Goyim. So that Yishmael is not enough. Avram needs to have more children. But in the meanwhile, he needs to allow Sara herself to raise Yitzchak himself. The home needs to be, sterile. The Hagar and Yishmael need to be out of the picture. But if the Sara completed her task and Yitzchak left the home, Avram Avinu is mechuyev to take back Sara, at least on the level of Pilegish, and to do now what he's able to do now, to be Moiled Hamoin Goyim. So Avram Avinu didn't move on, but he moved forward. In other words, this is really the moving forward of Sarah's legacy, of Chayei Sara, because Sarah, she did her part, she protected Yitzchak, and now, Livnei apilakshim ashel Avram, nosan Avram matones, vayishalchem me'al Yitzchak benoi, boidenu chai, Kate Mother's Kedem. In other words, he continues to make sure that Yitzchak and the other children will not be together. But so this is really the joint effort of Avram and Sarah. So this is the Hemshich of Chayei Sara. In the Haftarah of this week, we have the argument about, Adoniya wanted to take over Shlomo HaMelech, and in the end of the Haftarah, David promises Bathsheba that that his successor will be her son Shlomo. Vayishova HaMelech vayomer, Chai Hashem asher poda es nafshi mikol tzora ki kasher nishbati loch v'Hashem Elokei Yisrael leimer ki Shlomo b'nech yimloich acharai v'hu yeshev al kisi tachtoi, etc. Then it says vatikoid bas sheva apayim eretz vatishtachu lamelech vatoimer yechi adoni hamelech David la'olam. The king David should live forever. How is the king David going to live forever? He's about to die. Yeah, we're talking Hamelech David Zokein Bo Bayomim. We're talking about appointing a successor. But obviously, the appointment of Shlomo, who's Roi to take over David Hamelech, is really the way that Yechi Adoni Hamelech David La'olam. In other words, because we're not talking about David's flesh and blood. We're not talking about the biological David. We're talking about what the spirit of David, and his spirit will live on. So the shaykhs of the Haftarah to the Parsha is not just because in the Parsha we have Vayigva, Vayomes, Avrom, B'Seiva, Toiva, Zokein, V'Soveya, and in the Haftarah we're talking about Vamelech, David, Zokein, Bo Bayomim, but also because the Yechi Adoni Hamelech David La'olam parallels the Chayei Sara, which go on even after Sara is gone. And that's because she lived a life of Kulon Shovin Letoiva, as Rashi says, Shnei Chayei Sara. Now, Sara, obviously, didn't have an easy life. For 90 years, she was an Akara. Then she had this whole quarrel with Hagar. And then she had before, and then she died prematurely. Chazal say how that happened. So what does it mean that kulon shovin letoiva? Obviously, she wasn't defined by circumstances, because she lived a life which was a pneumiistic life, and that life is a life that goes on. Therefore, the Chayei Sara transcends the physical condition of the milifonai, the Mesi milifonai. Okay, Rabbi Isai, I wish you all a guten Shabbos.